Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is August 30th. On this day in 1983, 19-year-old Susan Lee Eades finished a shift at a bar in Nassau Bay, Texas, and stepped into the late summer night. But by the next day, she would be found murdered in a vacant lot nearby. Today, we're talking about one of Houston's most painful cold cases, the disappearance and murder of Susan Lee Eades. It's a case that went for decades without answers or justice. And yet, nearly 40 years later, the persistence of investigators and the power of modern DNA technology finally brought closure to Susan's story. Let's get started. Susan Lee Eades was just 19 years old when her life was cut tragically short. A Clear Lake High School graduate, she had been balancing two jobs at local bars, Charlie's Bar in Nassau Bay and the Prickly Pear in Webster. Friends remembered her as vibrant and responsible. She was the kind of teenager who worked hard but still carried the energy of someone with their whole future ahead of her. On the night of August 30th, Susan was working in Charlie's. Witnesses said that she finished her shift and left the bar wearing her gold necklace and her Clear Lake High School class ring, two pieces of jewelry she always wore and which have never been found. Her car, a 1976 Chevrolet Monte Carlo, was discovered later in the Gulf States Yachts parking lot, a short distance from where her body was eventually found. The placement of her car suggested that she had intended to drive somewhere else, but she never made it. On the morning of August 31st, 1983, Susan's body was discovered by a passerby in a vacant lot near Nassau Road 1 and Elam Street in Seabrook, Texas. She had been strangled with the black bodysuit she was wearing. It was twisted tightly into a ligature around her neck. She had been sexually assaulted, and her body showed bruising that confirmed a violent struggle. For her family, the discovery was devastating. Their bright, hard-working daughter hadn't simply vanished. She had been brutally attacked and left in a vacant lot. Investigators quickly moved to generate leads. Eyewitnesses described a man seen with Susan on the night she disappeared. A sketch was drawn of a man in a cowboy hat with pronounced cheekbones, a mustache stretching past his lips, and long hair falling over his ears. The drawing was circulated widely, but despite how distinctive it looked, no one came forward with a match. For years, the case went cold. Susan's name faded from the headlines. And yet, her family never gave up hope that someone, somewhere, would bring them answers. In 2018, 35 years after her murder, investigators and KHOU's Missing Pieces series worked to bring the case back to the forefront. Reporters released recordings of anonymous phone calls that Susan's mother had received years earlier. On the calls, a man claimed that he had photographs of Susan. The voice was chilling, but it was never traced. The calls didn't solve the case, but they reminded the community of something important. Susan's story wasn't over. The renewed attention gave police an opportunity to re-examine old evidence with new tools. And the Texas Department of Public Safety doubled the Crime Stoppers reward from $3,000 to $6,000 to encourage tips. The Seabrook Police Department, the Texas Rangers, and the FBI all worked together to reopen Susan's file. They carefully combed through preserved evidence, hoping that modern forensic science could do what investigators in 1983 could not. And in the end, it was DNA that eventually broke this case wide open. Forensic scientists were able to recover a DNA profile from Susan's bodysuit, the very clothing that had been used to kill her. That DNA profile became the key to unlocking the case. Through the emerging field of forensic genealogy, investigators began building family trees from the profile, working backwards through distant relatives until the lines converged on one man, Arthur Lee Davis. In May 2020, nearly 37 years after Susan's murder, investigators announced what her family had been waiting to hear. Her killer had been identified. Davis was a 35-year-old Vietnam War veteran and boat captain. He matched the original sketch almost perfectly: the cowboy hat, the mustache, the cheekbones. The DNA recovered from Susan's body tied him conclusively to the crime. But here's the tragic twist. Davis had died in January 1984, just months after Susan's murder, in a one-car crash less than a mile from the crime scene. He was gone before police ever had a chance to question him. This meant that there would be no trial, no chance to hear him explain, and no opportunity to hold him accountable in court. Still, for Susan's family, just knowing his name brought them some measure of peace. In June 2020, Susan's family and investigators who worked tirelessly on her case gathered at her gravesite. Together, they laid red roses on her headstone. After nearly 4 decades of not knowing, they finally had an answer. Investigators acknowledged that while no charges could ever be brought, Susan's story proved the value of persistence and of preserving evidence even when hope seems lost. As forensic scientist Amanda Belasco explained, the DNA evidence was still viable all those years later. The advances in technology had transformed what once felt like a dead end into a solved case. Susan's story now serves as a reminder of 2 things. First, that even when justice in the legal sense is impossible, truth still matters. And second, that families and communities don't forget. They hold on to hope, sometimes for decades, until science and determination catch up. Susan Lee Eades was a daughter, a classmate, and a young woman who was working hard to build her future. For far too long, her case was treated as a question mark. But today, thanks to DNA and forensic genealogy, it stands as proof that even the coldest cases can be solved. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found Susan's story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!